Absolute Green Arrow is one of the most anticipated comics that I've seen in the past, like, close to 10 years, really. And it does almost everything right. It's like 99% there. But it might actually be 100% there, because that last percent, like, I don't know. I feel like if they just made one slight tweak to it, it would have been better, but at the same time, maybe they made the right choice with that 1% tweak, and like, I don't know. I'm confused. But I'm getting ahead of myself. Let me go ahead and explain. Absolute is a series of books that's being published by DC Comics right now. It's, as of right now, almost 2 years old, I guess. And it's completely separate from its mainline continuity of books. While characters like Batman, Superman, and Wonder Woman appear in the Absolute books, they are altered significantly and reimagined in new settings that are darker than the normal mainline books, and they have been extremely successful. But then something wild happened. Before the book is even out, as soon as it was put into the preview catalogs and the premise of the book was made public for everyone, it immediately dethroned Absolute Batman in the #1 sales spot on the sales charts, which is absolutely insane because Absolute Batman is pulling these huge numbers month by month with all of its releases. It didn't look like anything was going to dethrone it, and before the book even releases, Absolute Green Arrow does it. The premise of the book is what got a lot of people very, very excited about it, because this is very, very current events. It's very bold, it's very great. Basically, it's a detective story. The cops go into this building and they find the few remains of the CEO, tech bro, multi-billionaire guy who was also very connected to Jeffrey Epstein's island. They find him, he's just shredded apart by this mysterious ghost-like zombie archer guy who's been co-opting the symbol of an investment app called Green Arrow, which is basically Robinhood. If you ever used the Robinhood app, it's basically the same thing. And the guy who invented the Robinhood app, who invented the Green Arrow app, his name is Oliver Queen, but he was recently murdered. And it's like everything feels connected through this mysterious archer that nobody knows anything about. And it's just, it felt so good. Yeah, it's a detective story, but the real selling point is the catharsis. Reading this book gave me the same kind of vibes as seeing like Punisher and Daredevil Born Again, or really a lot of Daredevil Born Again. If you like Daredevil Born Again, you're going to really dig this, because it takes really, really big, really current issues and just doesn't shy away from it, except sort of it does, and that's the whole point of the video here. I see a choice that they've made that a lot of very comparable social justice centric comic books and stories choose to do, which is that they have a very real world problem in here. The whole thing with the island and the CEOs and the billionaires and the crimes that are taking place there and the cover-ups, it's like, it's all there, but they choose not to use the real world names and the real world faces associated with it. This book has helped me put into words a question I've been wrestling with for a while. When you're referring to real world evil in the world of fiction, is it better to show all of the details as they really appear in real life? Or is it better to obscure some of it through symbolism? Alright, if I may, I would love to talk a little bit about Captain America Comics #1. I saw a real copy recently at a Comic-Con. It was crazy, it was so cool. That right there, very famous cover. Captain America punches out Hitler and knocks his teeth out, and it's awesome and it makes you proud to be an American. But the story of this cover is quite possibly more interesting than the story that follows the cover. It's actually a really bold statement that Jack Kirby was making. You go back to New York City in 1939, and they had this huge event there. It was a pro-Nazi rally where they related George Washington, they related patriotism and Christianity and Christian nationalism to the ideals of Adolf Hitler. And lots of people attended this, and a lot of people didn't seem to see a problem with this, because for a couple of decades by that point, there was this big isolationist movement where people were not interested in helping out other countries. And quite often the result of that is you become very closed off, you become very cynical, and societies become a bit more racist. It leads to a lot of problems. And then of course Jack Kirby, he's not a big fan of that, and he makes this cover where he takes a very, very bold stance. Somebody dressed in the flag, our star-spangled man with a plan, punches out this character that at the time in the United States of America was controversial at best and liked at worst. Captain America punching Hitler in the face and knocking all of his teeth out on the ground was a line in the sand moment. After America entered the war, you couldn't stop superheroes from punching out Hitler, but Captain America was the first, and he was the strongest statement against that very specific fascist regime. I'm bringing all this up because we're far enough removed from these real-world events that it's kind of hard to remember that at one point, these were strong and bold statements to make. If we flash forward a few years into 1946 and we look at the Superman radio show, we can see another story that, spiritually speaking, is trying to do the same thing that cover did. You see, a journalist named Stetson Kennedy wrote up this big expose on the Ku Klux Klan. And one of the things he decided to do with that is he called up the producers of the Superman radio show and he pitched to them this story where Superman fights the KKK, and they liked it, and it turned into the story arc Superman versus the Clan of the Fiery Cross. And decades later, it was eventually adapted into this amazing book. If you haven't read this, you really should. Superman Smashes the Klan. Along with giving us this great story about Superman beating the crap out of white supremacy and showing everyone why racism is stupid, it also exposed so much about how that particular organization chooses to work. It exposed all of their finances, it exposed their recruiting strategies, it exposed their power strategies, and it's like, holy cow, they just left everything on the table. The big difference, though, between this and the Captain America cover is that they don't use the same names or the same faces for things. Strictly speaking, Superman didn't fight the KKK, he fought the Clan of the Fiery Cross. It's different, but it's not really. They wore hoods like the real thing, they had the same color scheme as the real thing, they burned crosses like the real thing, they had people all over the place in all walks of life like the real thing. It's just that, strictly speaking, they weren't. One takes on a real evil very directly with real names and real faces. The other takes on a very real evil very directly, but grants itself a certain amount of deniability by using an only slightly fictionalized version of the real thing. And Absolute Green Arrow lands very firmly in the second category. Comics writers have found a lot of mileage out of using characters and locations as symbols for real-world evil rather than addressing the real thing directly. One problem that does arise when you're trying to address the real thing is that eventually we get better, people get better, so you run the risk of becoming somehow outdated. The other thing is that perhaps you send your superhero off to go fight in a real world war, and they end the war in the real world in your story, but then the audience closes the book and the war is still happening outside, and it's a little bit deflating. But if you use something fictional, then you get an entity that publishers, writers, and artists can control entirely, and they can update it or they can change it as needed to keep it relevant. A good example of this is the country of Baravia from DC Comics. So the first mention of the country of Baravia comes all the way back to Superman number 2, where it was kind of a stand-in for insert European country here. There was a conflict that was going on over in Europe. It didn't have a name yet. It would eventually turn into World War II. But that's what they did. They created the country of Moravia to be a stand-in for that conflict. 87, close to 87 years actually. Wow. Oh, all of my favorite characters are old. 87-ish years later, we get the Superman movie, the 2025 Superman. And the country of Moravia exists in that one too. And Moravia is, on paper, an ally to the United States, though there's plenty of people in the United States that aren't super impressed with them and how they've been acting, and they're very, very power hungry and want to eat the neighboring country of Jarhampar, which is very similar in a lot of ways to the Israel and Iran conflict that is happening. But then the difference that comes when we're talking about Absolute Green Arrow is that there is not much hiding that. Like, it is very blatantly talking about Epstein's Island. It's just, they just have a thin layer of symbolism over it to obscure it just slightly. But that actually does a lot to the conversation. When we make an analysis of comics or books or really any kind of media, and we look at the events that are taking place inside of it, we need to consider those events not just from the viewpoint of when they were written, but how they are seen now and seen today. It can be hard to segment things like Captain America Comics #1 and why its cover is so important, because there's so many reasons why this particular cover is so important. But if we take a look at what this cover and this character has come to mean so many years later, it's a reoccurring pattern within Captain America of why fascism is bad, how evil men rise to power, and what it takes to take them down. And when we think about this cover specifically, Hitler as a person has kind of faded, but as a symbol has continued to go on to represent evil. Shorthand representation of evil is Hitler. And so when we see Captain America punching out Hitler on that first comic book cover, it still works because the symbolism has remained intact since then. And because that real world person has become more of a symbol over time than a person, when you replace that with another character, for example, take the Red Skull, if you see like a variant cover that uses the Red Skull instead, it still has the same message to it. It still works as the intended message that the original had. The comic book version of Superman Smashes the Klan is very different from the radio show. The radio show will have like its story going on, and then partway through will just pause and stop everything so that one of the characters, typically Clark or Perry White, can look into the... It's a radio show, there's no camera, but they look towards the audience and just start explaining things about how that organization chooses to work. But when we put that same story through a modern lens and we take out the essay element that inspired the story to begin with, what we end up with is something that's a lot bigger than taking down one specific racist organization. It becomes a conversation about what causes racism? How does racism get passed down to the next generation? How do you defeat racism through acceptance and curiosity and love of other people and love of yourself? It's really, really cool. And it takes something that was very literal at the time and puts the symbolic edge onto it, which I think actually gives the story a lot more life. I remember before this book was released, Superman fighting the Ku Klux Klan and that very specific story was more of a historic, interesting fact. And putting it through more of a narrative lens makes it a symbolic act now. So this thin layer of symbolism that gets painted onto these real world evils, the more I think about it, the more I'm like, I don't think it takes away from the argument. I don't think it takes away from the event. It doesn't make you miss the target. It makes the target bigger. It makes it more inclusive. At the same time, it gives you the ability to target something very specific too. I know that it can be hard to remember this, but eventually Epstein and all of the fools who followed him It's all going to end eventually, one way or the other. None of them are immortal, and the world is mad enough to where we're not just going to let them get away with this. We're going to keep hounding them until the end of their days. So, when it's all over though, I think the symbolism is what's going to save Absolute Green Arrow here, that thin layer of symbolism, because it turns the story from specifically us as readers and as comic book fans and as people getting some kind of like second or third hand revenge on this great evil that seems to be getting away with it. And we'll turn it into a conversation about how greed and pride will eventually take down the great and powerful, and what all of that ends up looking like. You know, if Absolute Green Arrow continues to do well, in a few years I can see us talking about this book in the same way that we talk about Captain America Comics #1 or Superman Smashes the Klan. It's the kind of book that pointed at real world evil, called it what it was, especially when the systems that are put in place couldn't seem to do that. I don't know, it's kind of a nuanced argument here. Like, part of me still really wishes that they used the actual real names and the actual real faces associated with the topic. But the fact that it made me think about it this long tells me that this book is probably doing something right. Now, like I said, this is a big topic, so I would love to hear what you guys have to say about it. Go ahead and put your thoughts in the comments below, and until next time, thank you for joining me. Have a great day. Remember to always be your best self. Alright, and this is the insert where I'm talking about this book and just kind of showing off the cover a little bit. Because it's a really cool cover and it's hidden inside this Mylar bag that's reflecting a little bit. Move my hand around so it looks like I'm still talking about it.